King Lear, late at night on the cliffs, asks the blind Earl of Gloucester, "How do you see the world?" And the blind man Gloucester replies, "I see it feelingly." And shouldn't we all? The poet Rudyard Kipling wrote about young men dying in World War I. And if they ask you why we died, tell them that our fathers lied. The litany of lies continues today. You see, the world is crying out for only two things: leadership and the truth. Tonight, I'm simply going to tell you the truth. The wise Chinese have a term for it, jiao. Listen to the friend who tells you the truth, even if it hurts. So let's just tell the truth fearlessly and forcefully. That is what the Sanskrit word satyagraha means, the truth force. That is the word that helped Mahatma Gandhi liberate India from the shackles of British rule. And we have much to learn. Alvin Toffler said, "The illiterate of the 21st century is not those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." I have always admired Count Moltke, the Prussian general, a soldier who preferred to think rather than to speak, a man silent in 7 languages. You see, it takes courage to stand up and speak. It also takes courage to sit down and listen. Now, there was a time when my favorite food was lobsters and filet mignon, a fact for which I am so profoundly ashamed today. So what made me as a young man decide to leave the world of lobsters and Learjets in exchange for shelters and slaughterhouses? To take nothing but pictures, own nothing but memories, leave nothing but footprints, kill nothing but time. You see, something happened to me. I had been to Dante's Inferno, but unlike Dante Alighieri, I did not have Beatrice for my love, nor Virgil for my guide. I heard the screams of my dying father as his body was ravaged by the many cancers that killed him. And I realized I'd heard those screams before. In the slaughterhouse, on the cattle ships to the Middle East, and a dying mother whale as a Japanese harpoon explodes in her brain as she calls out to her calf. Their cries were the cries of my father. They were identical. And I discovered that when we suffer as equals. And in their capacity to suffer, a dog is a pig, is a bear, is a boy. So when I look into your faces here tonight, I recall the words of the Greek poet Horace. Change only the names, and my story is also about you. Now, they say that Americans go to war to learn about geography. Well, my wife and I have found a better way. We go where we are needed. This is where we work every day. It's in our face. It won't take long, but you need to know where we work. In China, 7,000 magnificent moon bears, their limbs torn off in traps, are imprisoned in steel coffins welded shut as a catheter drains bile into a bucket which the Chinese drink. The bears go insane. For 26 years, they can't move. In Korea, dogs are beaten to death in the marketplace because Koreans believe that pain and suffering makes the meat tasty. In South Africa, 5,000 Tame orphan lions are drugged and killed with guns, spears, or torn apart by hunting dogs, and they call it sport. In Canada, 300,000 baby seal pups are clubbed and skinned alive on the ice, their tiny hearts still beating. To our shame, in Australia, 90 million kangaroos are killed every year, and we adorn them on our coat of arms. It is the largest land animal slaughter in the world. We should be ashamed of it. And in Australia, we also send millions of our animals on death ships to the Middle East, where their eyes are stabbed out and their tendons are slashed for 30 pieces of silver. Every penny that I invested in the Basatine slaughterhouses in Cairo was utterly wasted. The cruelty continues. In Asia, where we work a lot, dogs are suspended on hooks and skinned alive to make trim in fur coats, which is sold in Europe. The oceans, as you know, are dying in our time. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead. We treat the oceans as a private pantry and as a public toilet. The Pacific Gyre now is so full of plastic, junk, and human feces, it has created a floating footprint bigger than India. Dolphins and whales are stabbed to death in the shallows of Taiji and the Faroe Islands, and huge bays are blood red. 100 million sharks are torn from the ocean, their fins are hacked off, and their bodies are thrown overboard to die agonizing deaths for shark fin soup. And factory farms spew chemicals into the ocean, creating hypoxic dead zones of 1 million square kilometers, killing plants, coral, and ocean animals. And billions of bouncy little chicks are ground up alive simply because they are male. And most tellingly nowadays, as we travel into some parts of the subcontinent to fight religious activism, religious sacrifices of innocent animals make the 21st century look like the new Dark Ages. And children today in poor countries starve because their croplands now produce meat for foreigners. You'll be pleased to know I won't show you any more pictures of our work. But this is what we confront every single day. That is the truth. In human history, only 100 billion people have ever lived. 7 billion people are alive today, and yet we humans torture and kill 2 billion sentient, living, loving animals every week. 2 billion per week. And we stab and suffocate 1 billion ocean animals every 3 hours. Trillions of fish are ground up into pellets to feed to livestock. Vegetarian cows are now the world's largest ocean predators. As I said, the oceans are dying in our time. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead. And they are the lungs and the arteries of the earth. 2048. Oceans sequester more CO2, carbon dioxide, than all the forests of the world put together. On this basis, no child under the age of 10 will ever reach retirement age. It is a mathematical impossibility. If that does not chill your blood. 10,000 entire species are wiped out every year because of the actions of one species. We are killing species before we have even met them. And we now face the 6th mass extinction in cosmological history. If any other organism did this, a biologist would call it a virus. It is a crime against humanity of unimaginable proportions. You see, meat is not an industry. It is an atrocity. A squalid, cruel, bacchanalia of butchery. The animal industrial complex will not rest until there is no one left to lie to. I urge everybody to, as Shakespeare said, stiffen the sinews, summons up the blood, and please watch the movie Earthlings. Now, there are two peak predators on this planet: humans on land and orcas in the ocean. In the 20th century, humans killed 200 million members of their own species. Orcas killed none. So what does that say about us, the reptilian-brained, anthropocentric mammal who happens to have an opposable thumb, who grandly describes himself as Homo sapiens, the thinking ape? Remember, we're only half a chromosome away from a chimpanzee. What does it say about us? And I've learned that we should not expect protection from world governments either. In the 20th century, 100 million people have been killed by their own governments. Edmund Burke, the great statesman, said, "For evil to prevail, all it takes is for good people to do nothing. Doing nothing is no longer an option." And Victor Hugo said, "There is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come." Well, here's an idea whose time has come. Animal rights is now the greatest social justice issue since the abolition of slavery. You can put that in the bank. And this is not just about animal rights. It is also about human wrongs. It is a revolutionary event more powerful than the Industrial Revolution, the Hubble telescope, or anything conceived by Galileo, Copernicus, Einstein, Darwin, or Freud. Because it protects the most precious of all things, life. People like you are on the right side of history. Happily, the world is changing. 10 years ago, Twitter was a bird sound. www was a stuck keyboard. Cloud was in the sky. Skype was a typo. 3G was a parking space. Google was a baby's burp. And Al-Qaeda was my plumber. Now, the most beautiful word ever written in any country at any time in human history came from India, from the Upanishads, 3,000 years ago. Ahimsa, non-violence to any living being. In everything we say and do or think, it is elegant, it is enduring, and it is powerful. So I have decided to be ahimsan. And by definition, therefore, I must be vegan. Not because veganism describes our nationality, our politics, our religion, our diet, or our lifestyle, but because it defines our character. It says we oppose violence in everything we do and wherever it occurs. Now, everyone here, I'm sure, has been taught by their parents to observe the golden rule. Do unto others as you want them to do unto you. Well, that was supposed to come from Jesus in the New Testament. That is true. But it actually goes back further. It goes back to the Babylonian Jew, 70 years BC. In fact, it goes back even further to the Analects of Confucius, 500 BC. It has been with us for millennia. Now, the anthropologist Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a few committed people, like your party, can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Well, There are only 13 million Jews in the world, and yet they play such a vibrant role in international affairs, in politics, philosophy, the arts, and the number of Nobel Prizes they win. Trix and I sat in the stadium at the Olympic Games, and we were very proud when Australia won more medals than every country in the world, except for the United States and Russia, with a population of only 20 million. Tibet's population is only 3 million, but who hasn't heard of the plight of the Tibetan under the boot of Beijing? But there are over 600 million vegetarians in the world, and that is bigger than the United States, England, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Australia, Holland, New Zealand, all put together. If they were one nation, they would be bigger than the 27 nations of the European Union. And despite this massive demographic footprint, they are still drowned out by the raucous hunt and shoot and kill and cretins who believe that violence is the answer when it should not even be a question. But we live in a world of media sound bites. It reminds me of Hannah Arendt's book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she coins the term, the banality of evil. So at the Australian of the Year Awards, this is how an evil mainstream journalist twisted my innocent words. Mr. Wollen, I'm surprised a man of your standing would say that meat is murder, a little old lady with a budgerigar is offending God, livestock production is unethical, there will be no peace until we stop killing animals, industry is unattractive, and animals are like human children. Can't you see how offensive that is to our farming community? This was my diplomatic counterpunch. You've certainly bludgeoned the English language to death, but if you're going to quote me, please do it honestly. I did say, a robin redbreast in a cage puts all heaven in a rage. But that came from the poet William Blake in Auguries of Innocence. And it was the Prophet Muhammad who said, a sparrow does not fall from the sky without Allah knowing. And yes, I did say, the commandment, thou shalt not kill, applies to the murder of any living being. It was inscribed on the human breast long before it was ever proclaimed from Mount Sinai. But actually, that was Leo Tolstoy. And yes, I admit I did say, the roots of cruelty are not strong, just widespread. But a time will come when inhumanity, protected by custom, will succumb to humanity championed by thought. A man is ethical only when all life is sacred to him. But that was Albert Schweitzer who won the Nobel Peace Prize. And yes, I admit I did say, as long as we kill animals, there will never be peace. It is only a short step to the concentration camps of Hitler and Stalin. There will be no justice as long as man stands with a knife and destroys those who are weaker than him. But that was Isaac Singer, winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. And yes, I admit I did have something to say about animals and children. The wolf will lie down with the lamb, the leopard with the young goat, the young lion with the young ones of the herd, and a little child will lead them. But that came from the prophet Isaiah. And no, I never said a word about animals and children or greed and ambition. That wasn't me, that was Jesus. He said, behold the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. King Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as one of these. And for good measure, he threw in a left hook and an uppercut. Whatever you do to the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. So are you, as a journalist, suggesting that your rural and farming audience is offended by Nobel Prize winners and the prophets? Or should I just go home and burn my books? I seem to recall that was the strategy favored by Pol Pot. Well, the journalist was speechless, and he attacked me for being a radical. Ladies and gentlemen, we need another radical Copernicus and Galileo to remind us that we are not the center of the universe. We are not the center of the universe. Animals are not just other species, they are other nations, and we murder them at our own moral peril. The great, wonderful historian Barbara Tuchman now defines folly as acting against our own best interests. It is folly when we do things against our own best interests. And, as you might know, Occam's razor, named after the 14th century Jesuit priest, said that when you are presented with a number of possible solutions to a problem, the simplest one is always the best. Clear. They use that in engineering. So let's apply these tests to the animal-industrial complex. Forest depletion today, caused by the meat industry, costs 3 times as much as the recent global financial crisis, and it happens every year. Zoonotic diseases from factory farms now threaten a pandemic to rival the Black Death, which wiped out half of Europe. And meat and dairy is killing us and our economies with colon cancer, breast cancer, prostate and pancreatic cancer, heart disease, obesity, and diabetes. And Medicare has bankrupted the United States because of their bad eating habits. They will need $8 trillion invested in treasury bills just to pay the interest, and they have precisely 0. They could shut down every school, university, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Homeland Security, FBI, and CIA, and they still will not have enough money to meet their unfunded Medicare liabilities. All because of meat and dairy. Now remember that water is the new oil. Nations will soon be going to war over it. Underground aquifers that took millions of years to fill are now running dry. As a young Boy Scout, a teenager, I drilled my first well and struck sweet water at 80 feet. Only 80 feet. Today we are building an orphanage nearby, and at 800 feet we are sucking mud. And in China, at 3,000 feet, the drill head is still dry. Now, everyone here would be outraged if 10 jumbo jets crashed every day with no survivors. Well, the same number of children die every day because of water-related diseases. The mighty Colorado River, the Rio Grande, and the Yellow Rivers now no longer reach the sea, sucked dry by the meat and the dairy industry. And it gets worse. In 10 years, we will need another 10 Colorado rivers just to feed the increased population. So why do I speak about water? As Marianne has told you already. It takes 50,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of beef, 1 swimming pool. It takes 1,000 liters of water to produce 1 liter of milk, and an Australian farmer gets 24 cents for 1 liter, and he puts those animals through hell for it. Today, 1 billion people are starving. 20 billion people, that's million people, will die this year from malnutrition. Cutting meat by only 10% will feed 100 million people, and eliminating meat will end malnutrition forever. And food prices are skyrocketing. In the United States, corn prices went up 50% in 5 weeks. It used to cost me for Thai rice for my projects in Asia $197 a ton. And then it went up to $1,015 a ton. A 5-fold increase in 5 months. And poor countries sell their grain to the West for hard currency, whilst their own children starve in their arms. And the West feeds it to livestock. So we can eat a steak? Am I the only one in this room who sees that as a crime? Every morsel of meat we eat is slapping the tear-stained face of a hungry child. When I look into her eyes, do I remain silent? If everyone ate a Western diet, we would need 3 planet Earths to feed us. We've only got one, and she is dying. The Earth can produce enough food for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. And now we've discovered that greenhouse gas emissions from livestock vastly exceeds those of transport. More than cars, trains, buses, ships, lorries, bikes, everything. And methane from livestock is more than 20 times more potent than CO2. And now we find that the melting Siberian permafrost is a ticking time bomb. We have seen giant craters releasing massive amounts of methane on the Yamal Peninsula in northern Russia. When it releases the sequestered gas, the game is over. The Himalayan ice fields are correctly called the third pole because they irrigate half the world's population through the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Yangtze, the Mekong, and the Irrawaddy rivers. And these glaciers are melting fast. I presented these meat industry impacts in a speech to 2,000 wealthy multi-millionaire entrepreneurs in New Delhi, including Amartya Sen, who won India's Nobel Prize in Economics. I also told Muhammad Yunus, after he won the Nobel Prize, that all the good that he had done with Grameen Bank would vanish when Bangladesh drowns. To say nothing about Manila, Mumbai, Calcutta, Ho Chi Minh City, and Bangkok. And then Trix and I had dinner with Al Gore, and we gave him the same numbers. No arguments at all from 3 Nobel Prize winners, but lots of arguments from politicians. And we freak out when 1,000 refugees from the Middle East or other places arrive on our shores. Just imagine greenhouse gas emissions hitting 500 parts per million, or a 3-degree temperature rise, creating 100 million eco-refugees. This calamity will reshape the geopolitical landscape forever. Admiral Denny McGinn, the chief of US warfighting requirements, said, "History has proven time and time again that nations will raid and invade long before they starve." So we are facing the perfect storm. If any nation had developed weapons that could wreak such havoc on the planet, we would launch a preemptive military strike and bomb it back into the Bronze Age. But we can't, because it is not a rogue state. It's an industry. The good news is we don't have to bomb it. We can just stop buying it. So George Bush was wrong. The axis of evil does not run through Iraq, Iran, or North Korea. It runs through our dining tables. Weapons of mass destruction are our knives and forks. And increasingly, they are our chopsticks. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. The meat industry will end because we run out of excuses. So I say that veganism is the Swiss Army knife of an ethical future. One instrument solves all our ethical, economic, environmental, water, health problems, and ends animal cruelty forever. And farmers are the ones with the most to gain. Farming won't end, it would boom. Only the product line would change. Farmers would make so much money, they wouldn't even bother counting it. And I would be the first to applaud them. True leaders, politicians like a political party, must see this movement as the engine of redirected economic growth. Governments would love us. New industries would emerge and flourish. Health insurance premiums would plummet. Hospital waiting lists would disappear. Hell, we would be so healthy, we'd have to shoot someone just to start a cemetery. When I addressed the World Parliament of Religions, I said, the peace map is drawn on a menu. Peace is not just the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. Justice must be blind to race, religion, color, and to species. If it is not blind, it will be used as a weapon of terror, and tonight it is being used as a weapon of terror in those ghastly gulags we call slaughterhouses. So talking of peace whilst still killing animals is like loving literature and burning books. They are mutually exclusive ideas. They are incompatible in the same way that science is incompatible with the Flat Earth Society. An ethical vegan does not need the approval of the meat lobby any more than a Nobel laureate needs the approval of the village idiot. So in my journey through Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, very much like the Belgian Congo, I've learned some inescapable truths in my life. A man is measured not by how much money he makes, but how much of it he is willing to give away, particularly to strangers. And my heart resonates to the words of W.H. Auden. If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. I did not find my character on Wall Street because it lives on the road to Damascus. I've learned that the hands that help are holier than the lips that pray. I've decided that in the first half of a man's life, he should try to be successful. But in the second part of your life, you should try to be significant, and they are worlds apart. So Socrates and Epicurus were right. If you wish, an unexamined life is not worth living. It's not a life, it's a life sentence. If you wish to increase a man's share of happiness, do not aim to increase his possessions, simply decrease his desires. And as Martin Luther King said, particularly about this cause, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it polite? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? Is it right? Now, I speak to audiences all around the world, some of them small groups and some of them up to 5,000 people. And they are all good, caring, decent, loving people who all want to change the world, as long as they don't have to change themselves. But life does not work that way. First we change in our hearts, and then the world follows. True leaders must face their own demons honestly and courageously. Martin Niemöller, the German priest, philosopher, and U-boat captain, spent 8 years in prison for condemning German intellectuals for being cowards. And he wrote, When the Nazis came for the communists, I remained silent. I was not a communist. When they locked up the Democrats, I remained silent. I was not a Democrat. When they came for the trade unionists, I did not speak out. I was not a trade unionist. When they came for the Jews, I remained silent. I was not a Jew. And then they came for me. And there was no one left to speak out. Men and women of integrity must speak out and act courageously. Is it not better to light a candle than to curse the darkness? All the darkness in the world cannot put out the light of a single candle. You see, I believe another world is possible. And on a quiet night, I can hear her breathing. So in the cause of fighting for animal rights, my message is, we face dangerous, cruel, vindictive people. Do not be afraid. Remember Gandhi's words. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. The last sentence of Scott Fitzgerald's book, The Great Gatsby, reads, "So we beat on, boats against the tide, drawn back ceaselessly into the past." I ask you, are we to live forever in a sick, smug, and cruel past? Let's not relive history. Let's make history, because that is what leaders do. They make history. Our animal cousins have survived millions of years of evolution. They have earned the right to share this planet with us in peace. And they have waited long enough. This is a battle in a war that civilization cannot afford to lose. The brutes and the bullies have been Goliath. But David is coming. Maybe he's in this room. Maybe he is one of you. And if not you, who? And if not now, when? Thank you all for being here.